Hi, this is Tandy McConnell, and today we're talking about the Paleolithic era and the Neolithic Revolution. Humans have been using tools for a very long time. Tools come so naturally to modern humans that it's hard to imagine the leap of ingenuity it must have taken to have been the first human to pick up a rock, find a way to put an edge on it, or to strip away the fibers from a plant and twist it into a string. From that point on, humans began making tools, and they became tool makers. They began to manipulate their natural environments to suit themselves, and they discovered that by using tools, by making clothes, by building shelters, by cooperating with one another, they could adapt to almost any habitat from the rainforest to the tundra. They could kill animals much larger than themselves, they could catch fish and gather all the bounty that the natural environment had to offer. For the great bulk of human existence, this is what it meant to be human: to hunt, gather, catch fish, find mushrooms, nuts, berries, and edible roots, make tools, build shelters, and, when the local environment had been exhausted, to move on. For a little less than 300,000 years, this is what it meant to be human. Along the way, these nomadic hunters and gatherers developed languages. They developed religious rituals and a great variety of lifestyles and beliefs, almost all of which remain a mystery to us today because only a few bare hints remain to tell us the tale. But these hints are intriguing. Humans are undoubtedly successful in this long expanse of hunting and gathering, and based on our knowledge of the few remaining hunter-gatherer cultures still existing in the remote parts of South America, Africa, and Australia, life for hunter-gatherers was really pretty good. Most hunters and gatherers spent only a few hours a day actually hunting and gathering. They appear to have been pretty healthy. They ate a varied diet of nuts, fruits, berries, occasionally enhanced with meat and fish, a diet that was probably healthier than the average American diet of processed sugar, processed corn, and gummy bears. But because their diet was limited to what the natural world could provide, there were unavoidable limits on their population growth. And except in places where food was especially abundant, the seashore for example, a nomadic existence was a necessity. Some nomads probably moved seasonally within a fairly small territory, hunting and gathering in the hills during the summer months, and then returning to the coast for the winter in a diet of fish, oysters, and seabirds. But about 13,000 years ago, at the end of the Pleistocene, which is to say the last ice age, a few people in what today we think of as the Middle East began to manipulate their environments in radically different ways. Rather than gathering whatever the natural environment threw their way, they started planting seeds. This had probably been going on casually for a very long time. Hunters and gatherers probably learned that if you gather all the seeds from a wild plant, there will not be anything to eat the next year. But agriculture, as it developed in the Fertile Crescent, was truly revolutionary, which is why we call it the Agricultural Revolution, or the Neolithic Revolution. Although it was more evolutionary than revolutionary, it still changed things for everyone. The planet has not been the same since, nor has the human experience. Once you plant seeds in the ground, it simply won't do to wander off for the next 2 months until the harvest is ready. There won't be a harvest if you do that. If you want any return on your investment in labor, you have to stay around the crops you planted, pulling up the weeds, driving off, or killing the animals or other humans that might like to eat it for you. You have to lay claim to the land. You have to persuade other people that this land is your land. And you, once the free and mighty hunter and gatherer, have become a farmer, attached to a small piece of land that you cannot afford to abandon because you invested so much of your labor into it. You have bet your future on it. And farming is hard work. Hunting and fishing might be challenging and at times dangerous, but clearing out brush to make a garden, breaking up the soil, planting and caring for crops, harvesting and storing, this is consistently hard work. It leaves less time for storytelling, less time for socializing, less time for play. It also creates conflicts. Paleolithic hunters and gatherers have very few things that they would think of as theirs. A few tools and weapons, their family, their friends, and not very much else. A farmer thinks of the garden, even a small plot at the edge of the woods, as his or hers. It has to be protected from those who do not have a garden. Farmers have to think forever of the future. The transition from Paleolithic hunting and gathering to Neolithic farming was slow, uncertain, and uneven. Some cultures, perhaps because they saw no need to, never made this transition. Most, perhaps all, early agricultural societies mixed gardening with hunting and gathering. Some members of the community likely specialized in one or the other of these. Farmers won out over hunters and gatherers for one reason: farmers could have more babies. Nomadic hunters and gatherers had to space childbearing at 3 to 5 year intervals. You can't very well be carrying 2 or 3 babies around as you move from place to place. Children, while vital to the community, were not going to be a great deal of help until they became old enough to walk and could tell the difference between mushrooms that would taste great with mastodon steaks and mushrooms that would leave the whole community dead. The children of farmers, however, could learn to pull weeds while they were little more than toddlers. And because agricultural societies tended to be more sedentary and the food supply more predictable, babies could be produced every couple of years. In the struggle for survival, victory goes to the side that produces the most children and gets them to adulthood so they can have children of their own. At this contest, farmers won out over hunters and gatherers just about every time. Plant-based agriculture was invented in different parts of the planet at different times, yet it followed a predictable pattern. Plants that were native to a region and which had been collected in the wild for many generations were planted in gardens. In the Middle East, the most important was a predecessor to modern wheat. The yam, a root crop which is not a sweet potato, has been cultivated in West Africa for many millennia. Maize, which we would call Indian corn, was first cultivated in Mexico, and potatoes were discovered and cultivated in extraordinary varieties in ancient Peru. Rice was first domesticated in China. Whether by intentional manipulation or happy accidents, plants of only minimal value in the wild were selectively bred to create new forms of old plants upon which a whole society could depend. At the same time, these newly domesticated plants came to depend entirely on human intervention to reproduce. Most wild plants have a mechanism for seed dispersal that was inconvenient for farmers, so such characteristics were bred out of the cultivated varieties until, as in the case of maize and bananas, they can no longer reproduce at all without human help. It's a bit easier to imagine the domestication of animals. Ancient hunters undoubtedly pursued flocks of wild goats and sheep. They probably came to think of the flocks they hunted as their herds and protected them from other predators, human and otherwise. They also came to recognize the advantages of allowing the breeding females of the flock to live and reproduce while killing only the infertile females and the males. They also came to recognize the advantage of killing the wildest members of the flock while encouraging the tamer animals to reproduce and pass on these more convenient characteristics. Over several generations of this selective breeding, a flock of sheep or goats came into existence that, like domesticated plants, came to depend on humans for survival. Not every animal is amenable to domestication, and some are just barely domesticated. Elephants can be trained, but they remain dangerous and unpredictable and undomesticated. The same is true for most wild animals. Dogs and cats, gerbils and guinea pigs, swine and horses and cows have most of the wildness bred out of them, although horses remain able to live just fine on the open range. They are domesticated, but not as completely as dachshunds or white leghorn chickens, which would become extinct were it not for people. The agricultural revolution changed the human experience to its core. Without agriculture, there would be no property ownership, no wealth, no poverty, and almost certainly no slavery. Yet it offered one overwhelming advantage. As farmers got better at their jobs, they were able to produce more food than they needed to keep themselves and their families alive. They created gradually an agricultural surplus. This meant that while the vast majority of any pre-modern human population was still engaged in drawing sustenance from the soil, a few were able to specialize. A maker of pottery could exchange his pots for a bushel of wheat. A maker of stone tools could swap an axe for a couple of goats. Craftsmanship could improve as a few people specialized in making farm work even more efficient. Then about 5,000 years ago, first in Mesopotamia, and then not long thereafter in the Nile River Valley, the Indus River Valley, and the Yellow and Yangtze River Valleys, agriculture made something else possible: cities. Cities happen whenever people find themselves living together in a single organized community, drawing their sustenance from the labor of farmers out in the provinces. Cities are usually the centers of a culture. They're the locus of governments, the seats of monarchies, the places to which everyone else has to pay their taxes. If this makes you think of the Hunger Games, then you're probably not far off from the way many ancient farmers thought of the cities that dominated their lives as well. Without cities, however, you do not have a civilization. The idea of civilization is relatively recent, and its meaning is not all that apparent. Before historians define a culture as civilized, they usually expect it to have large urban centers, at least a few massive buildings, writing, and a centralized government. While agriculture was widespread by 3000 BCE, civilizations were not. One could find cities in only a few places: Mesopotamia, the Indus River Basin, China, and Egypt. Only much later did civilizations emerge independently in Mexico and in Peru.